Shalom, shalom, everyone. Welcome. We are live coming to you from Jerusalem with a brand new segment called Rabbi in the Hot Seat. This is our inaugural segment, our first ever segment. I'm so excited for it. And I'm excited to bring on our guest, our rabbi that we're going to be putting into the hot seat today in just a second. But before we jump into all of that, I'd love to know where you guys are joining me from. So if you go ahead and utilize the chat, whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook or whatever, just let me know where you're watching from and who you are. So your name and where you're watching from. I'll start. I'm Raquel, and I'm joining you today from Jerusalem. And before we bring on the rabbi, I'd like to take a moment to tell you guys a little bit about our brand new segment. So this segment, Rabbi in the Hot Seat, is a brand new segment that's going to be reoccurring on a monthly basis. And we're going to be bringing up a new rabbi each time, and we're going to be putting him into the hot seat. What does that mean? We're going to be rapid fire all of your questions at him and see where we end up. So if you've ever had a burning question that you wanted to ask the rabbi, or if you have a question that you think you can stomp the rabbi with, then go ahead and put those in the chat, and we will try to get to those later in the segment. So without further ado, let's go ahead and bring on our guest for today for the very first episode. Welcome,
Hey.
Rabbi Gluckin. How are you?
Hey, everybody. What's happening?
So this is Rabbi Zvi Gluckin. Rabbi Zvi is going to be joining us for the first edition of Rabbi in the Hot Seat. And before we jump into putting you into the hot seat, why don't we start with a little introduction? Where are you from and a little bit about yourself?
Where am I from? I grew up in Jersey. I live in Boston, but right now I'm in Jerusalem. I've been here for 5 weeks in the middle of a 6-week trip.
Oh, you're in Jerusalem just like me. How cool.
That's right.
How cool. Okay. So, I hope everyone, I don't think I'm seeing anyone at the moment. Oh yeah, here we are. We have Jennifer from Texas.
Look at a stream of chats. All these people.
Yeah. Hi. We have Jennifer from Texas. We have Rachel who's watching the Big Apple. We have Elizabeth. Thank you all so much for joining us. Continue to let us know where you're joining us from. We'd love to hear from you. And before we go ahead and put you into the hot seat, I thought we'll
Oh my God.
Are you ready? Are you ready for it?
I'm too excited.
Okay, let's see. Let's go ahead and maybe ask you some of the things that people assume about you. Like, for instance, what's the most surprising thing that people assume about you as a rabbi?
As a rabbi?
Yeah, as a rabbi. Like, what's the most surprising thing
people assume about me in general is that I'm gregarious and extroverted, but really I'm kind of boring and just sit in the corner by myself. But as a rabbi, I don't know, people generally assume that I'm kind of a fuddy-duddy, a stick in the mud, pretty boring, but I don't know, I think I'm a lot of fun.
Really? That's the most surprising thing people assume about you?
I think so, yeah. It's just like, he's bland.
Okay. I think we lost you there for a moment.
No,
let me just go back to the chat and see who we have here. You're still there. We have Angela from Florida. We have Suzanne from Maryland that's watching. We have Tasha. She's watching from Canada. So a lot of good folks here. Thank you all for tuning in.
I can sing the Canadian national anthem if you want.
I think we'll pass on that one.
I used to be able to play it on tuba back when I was in high school.
See, that's an interesting thing, right?
Okay, there you go.
The interesting thing could be that people wouldn't know that you played the tubas back in high school.
There you go. I
Okay.
played Giant Stadium. I actually played a halftime show between the Giants and the Buccaneers. How cool is that?
Are you serious?
Yeah, my high school band. We had a good band in high school.
So there you go. Here's another thing that people may not have assumed about you. Okay, so I have a question, and I ask this to almost every rabbi that I meet. And I've known you for a little bit, but I haven't had the chance to ask you, so this is my chance. And the question is, if you could meet anyone from Jewish history, living or dead, who would they be and why?
I was thinking about this, and it could be a lot of people, but I'm going to go with Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, who
okay. Tell us a little bit about who he is and why.
So he's not so well known to the general public. Within the Jewish world, he's like he's pretty awesome. he lived in a really weird. Oh, look, I'm by myself. He lived in a really weird time. He lived in a time like early 1700s, from about 1700 to 1740 in that time. So I wouldn't want to necessarily go back to that world where they had outhouses and that didn't have indoor plumbing, but it was a time coming off a really turbulent time in Jewish life after a false messianic movement and a real clamp down on Jewish scholarship. But the flip side is right before the birth of the Hasidic movement. So it was sort of in this interim period. But he was a brilliant person, a master of the Kabbalah, who was sort of tortured and thrown from community to community. He spent a lot of time. He was from Italy, but he spent a lot of time in Amsterdam. He earned his living as a glass blower and then died very young. He was about 40 years old upon arriving in Israel. He died of tuberculosis. But just a really interesting sort of alternative character within the Jewish world who was mainstreamed after his life and was absolutely brilliant. And someone I would love to just pick his brain and talk to him.
Very interesting. I've actually never heard of him. So that's interesting. That's interesting that you bring that up. I'm going to have to look that up now. Okay, one more like easy question for you before we get to the difficult ones. And that is, when you're not being a rabbi, what are you up to? What do you get up to? Like, what is?
Well, once you're a rabbi, you're always a rabbi, right? So there's never any break from the rabbinical life. No. But what am I up to? I play the guitar. That's like my other life. Before I got into rabbinicalness, I actually have a degree in music, a degree in jazz studies.
Wow.
And my side hustle for about a decade was doing freelance journalism in the music press. So I've interviewed all sorts of people, like all my favorite rock stars from when I was a kid, and then lots of alternative characters as well. So everybody from, I don't know what kind of music people like, but everybody from George Clinton and Bootsy Collins to Joe Perry from Aerosmith, The Slash to you name it, just all sorts of cool people. So it's been a really wild ride, especially when they try to pronounce my name. They're like, how do you say that?
What are some of the things you've heard? Like, what are some of the pronunciations you've heard?
I once interviewed a guy named Richard Hell from a band called Richard Hell and the Voidoids, and he said to me, "What's your name?" And I said, "It's Sweet." He goes, "Don't you have a nickname, man?"
Do you have a middle name?
No, a nickname. That's
I know, but do you have maybe a middle name or something that's easier than Zvi for people?
When I got called up to the Torah, I'm named after my grandfather, my great grandfather, my mother's grandfather.
Oh, okay, interesting.
So, whatever. Anyways, that's me. Anyways, what else do you want to know?
Okay, so we've taken a bunch of questions from the community, as well as some of the questions that are the most asked questions to rabbis. And we're going to start with one of the biggest ones. One of the questions that I've heard.
I see some questions in the chat popping in here as well.
Yeah.
But I'll ignore those. I'll let you feed them to me.
Yeah, we're going to go ahead and get to those at the end. So continue to put those in the chat, everyone. We will be getting to them at the end. But for now, I'm going to start with, I think, one of the most asked questions ever to rabbis or to any kind of clergyman, probably. And that is, why do bad things happen to good people?
Well, you just starting with
I think this is a question that well, I think this is a question that a lot of people, especially in the Jewish world, especially here in Israel, have been, thinking recently. I mean, there's a lot of good people that have been lost. And I think this is on a lot of people's mind. Like, why do bad things happen to these good people? And then how are we able to understand that? What's the explanation for that?
So I'm going to give you a short, obviously this is an answer that really, oftentimes when I give this answer, it takes me a good 40 to 60 minutes to get through it without questions. And that's without diving into my propensity to pontificate, because that's sort of what you do in the rabbinical world. But so just suffice to say, I'm going to give you a quick answer now because this is the hot seat. And so this will be a good 2 to 3 minute answer. But just keep in mind that I'm going to give you a concept, which will be sort of to lay down the ground rules to really understand the Jewish approach to this topic. But it's not going to be satisfying. Like, there's going to be obvious questions that you're going to have and whatever. That's just the way but at least you can have a conceptual framework to understand the idea. So the first step in understanding this is really thinking of God like a coach. Like, if you ever play sports or play for a sport team, or are you trying to get better in music, you have a coach or a life coach or whatever. So a good coach is someone who that throughout the season you learn to hate. Isn't that true? That's generally what a coach is. Like, a coach is someone who you're gonna join his team, and he's going to immediately give you all these crazy rules, especially in sports. They give you a strict diet. He's going to you can't have sex through the entire season. Like, it's going to be very focused. But then he's going to start looking. He wants you to be great. So he's going to find your weaknesses and exploit those weaknesses. So if you're someone, let's say, who's always dropping passes when they're thrown to the left, I don't know. So that's going to be practice. It's going to be hundreds of passes to the left, and it'll go on for weeks, and it's going to be torture. And after the first couple of days, you'll probably say, okay, yeah, man, the coach is just trying to test me. But after a while, you'll be like, I hate this guy. And it's going to be constant work, and he's going to work you overtime. And exploiting your weaknesses it's going to be humiliating and difficult and frustrating, and going to make you angry, and maybe even break you a little bit. But what happens when you win at the end of the season and you win the championship? Suddenly you look back and you pour some Gatorade over the coach's head, and you realize that everything he did was fantastic, because if he hadn't pushed you and put you into this situation, you never would have developed be the player or the person you could have possibly been. It was through the work and through the effort that you became what you're capable of becoming. And that's actually interesting, because you look back and you laugh about it. And then, 20, 30 years into the future, when you're looking back at your career, that year you won the championship, you're going to laugh about it. Yeah, and you'll tell your friends, yeah, the coach tortured me and he killed me, and the weeks of throwing to the left, or whatever it is. That's the whole idea. In other words, it's a sense of perspective and understanding that what's happening, while at the time it looks terrible, it's actually coming to help you develop. I'll give you another way of looking at it, which is that most of us, unfortunately, most people don't really amount to anything without challenges. Challenges are really what make us become the people that we're capable of becoming. It'd be wonderful if we were always self-motivated and could just do great things, but generally speaking, we need to be pushed, and we need to in order to really develop and become ourselves. And what's interesting, I don't know how old everybody is in our group. I'm sure we have a nice diversity of ages. So if you're in your 20s, you might not be able to answer this question, but if you're in your 30s, you certainly could, or older, you certainly could answer it. That most people go through, by the time they're 30, have gone through an experience where at the time, it was the worst possible scenario you could imagine. And yet in hindsight, you look back and think that was the best thing that could have happened to me. It still was bad, but because of that situation, it led to opportunities or helped you develop to become the person that you were capable of becoming. And so that's the idea really of why bad things happen in Jewish consciousness. Bad is really just a question of perspective. It says in the Talmud that you're supposed to look at situations and say, Gamzu Latova, which means this is for the good. It doesn't mean that this is good. It means that this is for the good. It's coming for the good. At the time when you're experiencing it, it's bad. It hurts. It's painful. But because it helps you develop and become something incredible, you're able to look back and say, oh, okay, I understand why this is happening. Like I said, that's the concept. It doesn't necessarily answer, we're not going to be able to get to this. It doesn't answer questions like, why did children suffer, God forbid? Where was God in the Holocaust? Where was God on October 7th? Those are obviously much bigger questions, but we understand all these questions within this general framework of that God is giving you He's creating the situations that are going to force you to develop and become the person you're capable of becoming.
So does that mean that one of the ways to look at it is that it's all part of the larger plan for our life?
I mean, you could say that it's part of the plan, maybe, especially things that happen out of left field, things that you can't explain them, but sometimes are they plans, or it's God created the world for your benefit and pleasure. And the greatest pleasure that God could offer is a relationship with him, but he gives you the independence to earn that relationship. And so since you're independent, you have to make the steps to develop that relationship and develop yourself as a person. And if you're not doing it for whatever reason, because it's hard, or you're tired, or you can't be bothered, or you're distracted, or you don't understand, God will give you the necessary motivation to help you reframe your perspective and develop in a different way.
Okay. In the interest of time, I'm going to move along. There's so much more I'd like to ask you.
There's so many questions you can ask. I'm telling you, it's a good hour class.
Yeah. maybe we'll do one of those, because there's a lot to ask there. But one of the maybe the second most popular question, and we actually got this question in the community as well, Aish Plus community, is, what does God look like, and how do we know he's there and he's listening if we can't see him? Yeah,
that's a great question. So obviously, I can't answer for every religion, but I can tell you in Judaism, in Jewish thought, God doesn't look like anything. Because God, the primary belief in Jewish thought is God is non-corporeal. God doesn't have did I pronounce that right? Let's just say, yeah. God doesn't have a body. God doesn't have any physical attributes. We'll refer to God as he in general conversation, but God obviously doesn't have a gender. But any name that we have of God are really just descriptions of aspects of relationships that you can have to God. So you can relate to God as being merciful. You can relate to God as being the judge. And so sometimes you relate to God in the active sense. That's when you use he, because God is the active force in the universe. And sometimes you relate to God in the passive sense in terms of in she, right? And meaning that we relate to God's divine presence, that sort of ethereal, intuitive connection or feeling that you have, that you're in touch with something bigger and grander than yourself. That transcends the limitations of the physical world. So that's like how we relate to God, at least conceptually. In terms of having the relationship, though, so I guess the idea that we have to realize is that Judaism is a choice, like how you choose to observe or live your life. You have to choose that. The Torah actually says, "B'charta b'chaim," that you should choose life, meaning that God gives you all the rules and tells you how the system works. But whether or not you actually do that is up to you. And then the system is really a system to have a relationship with God. So obviously, a relationship is dependent on the person who wants it the least. God wants the relationship. I'm here. Love me. So now how much you want it is how much effort you're willing to put into it. And so this really answers the question. You can't see God, but you have to go through two steps. Number one, you have to go through an intellectual process, try to understand, does God exist? How do I know God exists? What, to the best of my ability, obviously. You're not going to have a prophecy and God's not going to come down and reveal himself to you necessarily. Maybe he will, but most likely probably not. But still, you have to at least have like a basis for understanding it. But just because you know something intellectually doesn't mean you're going to feel it emotionally. Just because you know it doesn't mean you believe it. So much of Jewish life then is a process or a system of taking what you know intellectually and then going through the process of integrating that so you can live it and you can be real with it. That's the idea for prayer. That's the idea for blessings. That's the idea for things like a mezuzah on your doorpost. It's a constant reminder to internalize and get real with these ideas. I see you have a question, Raquel.
I do. I wanted to give you a follow-up on this. So then is it a feeling? Like, is it the way you feel about love? Like, how do I know I love my parents? Or how do I know, is it like that or?
Well, it's a little bit of both, right? See, it's interesting because philosophy and science are separate disciplines. Like I can demonstrate and prove to you that the world is round. We can go, maybe, but we could do the dish, look at the formula and you could shoot you up in a spaceship high enough and you can see it. You could have definitive understanding that the world is round. Whether or not your parents love you or you love your spouse or whatever it is. So that's more of an intuitive feeling. Most of us are much more real with the fact that we love our parents or our children or our spouse than we are with the fact that the world is round, even though it's much easier to quote unquote prove that the world is round because we're dealing with the realm that's not necessarily scientific. But that said, you have to look at the different types of evidence that exist to try to make an informed, intelligent decision. So you're not just being emotional, because if you're just being emotional, that's a product of desire, and you could start believing things that aren't necessarily true. You don't want that. You want to be able to be intellectually honest and make decisions that are as close to true as possible.
Right. Okay, thank you for that. Now I'm going to move on to one more popular question before we jump over to the audience and take some questions in real time. So get ready for that. Okay. A popular question that I actually have heard this question before, and I know the answer to it, but you can probably go into why people think this, is are rabbis allowed to marry?
Yes.
Yes. And why do people assume they're not allowed to marry? Where would that come from?
I think it comes from Christianity because priests don't get married. But that's not fair. I'm sorry. It's not just Christianity. There's an idea that holy people in general are ascetics and are celibate and don't get married. And there's a monastic tradition in many different religions. It's certainly popular in the East. It's popular in Catholicism. I don't know if Islam has a monastic tradition like this, but it's I don't want to put down other religions, but from a Jewish perspective, it's a misnomer. In Jewish consciousness, marriage and being active sexually and being active as a person, and experiencing all the pleasures that this world has to offer, it's a fundamental part of how God designed this world and how he wants us to live. More than that, if you're actually going to be taking a position of authority, let's say as a rabbi or as a person sitting on a judicial court or whatever. So generally speaking, you're supposed to be married. In Jewish courts, the judges have to be married, and they can't render judgments if they don't have children. Because how could you be merciful if you don't deal with these crazy little people all the time? So it teaches you how to live in this world. Also, through marriage, through the relationship, you come to understand your relationship with God, because obviously, your relationship with God is really it's just a higher level of connection, and it's actually fascinating. But all the words that we use to describe like the spiritual experience are the same words we use to describe like intimacy and the sexual experience, right? Intimacy, closeness, oneness, unity, because it's a sense of coming together and closeness. And so marriage ultimately is the ultimate analogy and tool. Obviously, marriage should be more than just an analogy and a tool, but it's an analogy and a tool to help you understand really the ultimate connection, which is your connection to God.
I actually heard someone say that one of the only things you can use the money that you sold a Torah for is to make a wedding for like for a family that needed it, or like a couple who needed to get married and didn't have the money. Is that true?
I don't know. That I don't know. Sorry. But let's say yeah.
Okay, because then that would mean like that's how important marriage is.
For sure. For sure. Because there's all these different, like you can't sell your synagogue to make it into a park, right?
Right. If you get back to me on the next time about that one, I want to know if it's true.
Okay, I'll look into that for you.
And jump over to the audience. I was seeing a bunch of questions actually about Tish B'Av. Oh, here's a question. This is from Angela Lee. I don't know if I click on it. Can you see it? Angela Lee, yes. And she asked, what would you tell someone if they wanted to convert to Judaism?
Run.
I think that's a popular answer. Like, I give you a hard time if you want to convert.
I mean, in all seriousness, when you try to convert to Judaism, that's the first thing they do is they try to talk you out of it. Because if you're converted to becoming Jewish I think the simple way of looking at it, you don't need to be Jewish to fulfill your spiritual potential in this world. Fulfilling your spiritual potential as in terms of having a very beautiful and deep and fulfilling spiritual life, but also in terms of if you want to get mystical and talk about the afterlife and going to heaven, whatever that means, you don't need to be Jewish for that, And so if you're not Jewish, why do you need to take on this extra burden? However, generally speaking, when a person tries to convert, your first inclination is to talk them out of it, because this is not something you need to do. If a person wants to convert, you're converting because you sincerely want to join the Jewish people, be a part of the Jewish mission. And if that's really something you're sincere about and you want to do, so it's not so simple. It's at least a 1-year process, though. Most of the converts in my community, it takes longer than that. But if you want to go through it, then welcome, and you're welcome. You're like the rest of us.
Right. Okay. So in the interest of time, let's take more questions from the audience. Here is a question by Rachel, and she asked, what if I can't fast on Tish B'Av due to health reasons? What do you recommend I do to make the day meaningful? That's a good question.
Fantastic question. I actually had this about 4 years ago. I had this. It was before COVID. Maybe it was 5 years ago. I had this fever on Tisha B'Av. I was like I was pushing through and trying to make it through, and I was like shaking and whatever. And my rabbi was like, "So eat." Tisha B'Av is not Yom Kippur. At the end of the day, Tisha B'Av is a rabbinical holiday, and the rabbis were always very careful to distinguish between rabbinical holidays, rabbinical commandments, and things that come from the Torah. When it's something from the Torah and there's a question, you always go strict. When there's a question on a rabbinical, you always go lenient. So when it comes to fasting on Tisha B'Av, so obviously you're feeling ill, you're feeling sick. So, I don't want to, render a decision for everybody. You should speak to your local rabbi. But generally speaking, if you're sick, you can break the fast. That's for sure. How do you make it meaningful? So Tisha B'Av is still a very heavy and meaningful day. And all the things that we traditionally do on Tisha B'Av, whether it's sitting on the floor, whether it's doing some of the other signs of mourning, whether it's reading the supplicatory prayers called kinos that you read on Tisha B'Av, whether it is going to a community. I know for the last 2 years, I've gone to a synagogue in another part here in Israel where the rabbi, instead of reading the entire list of like 40 different, I I don't know what the English word for them is, the different like lamentations that people say. He went through like 5 or 6 of them, but then explained them and really gave a really in-depth analysis of what was happening. It was fascinating and fabulous. And so you really need to figure out what you do. Some people watch inspirational videos. Some people, have deep conversations with people. Some people go to classes. Whatever you can find that's gonna help you get the most out of the day. That's what you can really do. So fasting helps you feel it a bit more intensely, because the whole point is that since we're spiritually sick as a nation, and we're spiritually sick as people. We're not fulfilling our potential as people. So by fasting, you feel, I'm sorry, not sick, I should say weak. So by fasting, you feel physically weak. That's to remind you that you're spiritually weak. So if you're not fasting, you're not necessarily going to have that, but you can still tap into that in other ways.
Thank you. Let's move along to the next question, because we're going to run out of time soon. So Elizabeth asked, is it allowed to do enjoyable things in the run up to Tish B'Av? So we're talking about, I guess, those 9 days, such as, can children go to summer camp?
So yeah, for sure. Children go to summer camp. I have a son who's a counselor in a camp right now, actually, but they limit. So like they don't go swimming, they don't go on big trips in those days, but still they're kids. First of all, there's no mourning by children, signs of mourning and grieving rather. So anything is just educational anyway. So you don't have to be so strict with the children. It's really more for the counselors and the people running the camp. But that said, so they generally try to at least inculcate the message or the concepts or the ideas, so the children it'll be a learning experience for them. And children don't fast on Tisha B'Av. You don't start fasting until you're bar bat mitzvah. And so up until that time, so it's really just an educational time to get in touch with the heaviness and the importance of the day.
I actually kind of have a related question to that. My daughter is 12 years old. She just did a bat mitzvah. And so now she's all ready, gung-ho, and she wants to fast. Now, I know her. I don't think she can do the whole day. So I tried to tell her, let's do 2 meals. Let's do let's do water at least. And she's insisting she wants to do it. So I'm going to let her, but like, how do I talk to her about that and make her understand, like, it's not something, okay, you're 12, you have to do it. Like, you can ease into it. It's okay to I told her.
At 12 already, you're obligated. For a girl, you're already obligated, right? And if she's not feeling ill, so it's probably best to do it. But, prep her, give her a lot to drink. But it's easy when you're 12, by the way. It gets hard when you're like 18 and you don't want to do it. That's when it gets really hard. But, give her a lot of Gatorade. Don't let her run around in the sun.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's probably the best way to do it.
Okay, so I'll let her take a try at it. But if she can't hang on, is it okay, since it's a rabbinical holiday, for her to go ahead and eat?
If she's starting to feel sick, then I would discuss it with my local rabbi.
Okay. So I think we might have time for 1 or 2 more. Let's see what else we have here. Elizabeth asked another question. She asked, are you allowed to have a simcha even if Israel is at war?
A simcha while Israel's at war? Yes.
Yes. Okay, so like a wedding.
For sure. I mean, that's for sure. You can't let the enemies win, and more than that, like there were soldiers who got engaged, got married, had weddings during this time. Obviously you have to be sensitive to other people suffering, but we as Jewish, I'll tell you an amazing story. You want to hear? There's not really war, but it's the same. So if you remember it's probably 7 or 8 years ago now, there was that synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh where they shot up the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh. And then like a day or 2 later, there was a synagogue shooting in Los Angeles, or San Diego area, right? So I forget what day of the week the shooting was in San Diego, but there was a bris that was going to happen, a circumcision for a newborn boy that was scheduled for that Sunday in the synagogue. And the parent, I happen to have known the moil, and the parents, but he doesn't know that I know the story because I heard the story through the grapevine. But the parents were like, we can't do the circumcision, because of what happened in the synagogue, and the lady was killed, and the rabbi and the moil said, absolutely not. We do not back down. You don't let people destroy our Judaism. You don't let the enemies win these victories, and he went and they did the circumcision in the synagogue on that day. And that's how you do it. We're the Jewish people. We have to show defiance sometimes in the face of atrocity, in the face of our horrors. Life goes on and the Jewish people live on. Am Yisrael Chai.
Absolutely. And here in Israel, there have been tons of weddings among soldiers themselves.
Yeah, I have a friend, his son was still in training. It was before they went in. But they got married on base, and the bride came in, put on a dress, but he was in his uniform, and I think they gave him a week off, and then in.
Right.
That's how you do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see one more round if we have any more questions from anyone.
There's been a lot of questions here.
I know today was really rapid fire. I don't think we have any more questions, so I'm going to go ahead and let you go. I hope you guys all enjoyed this. We will be back with another episode of Rabbi in the Hot Seat very soon. So thank you all for joining us again. See you next time.
You know who the next rabbi is going to be? Somebody cool and fun?
I don't yet. Actually, I don't.
Okay.
See. Okay.
We'll see you all. Thank you, everybody.